I want to welcome everyone to the Budget Committee today. Today's hearing is titled Improving the Budget Process, Strategies for More Effective Congressional Budgeting. We're going to specifically consider biennial budgeting and proposals to reform the vote-a-rama process. We have two outstanding panels of witnesses today. Our first panel, which will focus primarily on biennial budgeting, includes Maya McGinnis, President of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. Welcome, Maya. Always good to have you before the committee. David Kendall, Senior Fellow for Health and Fiscal Policy at Third Way. Good to have you here, Mr. Kendall. And Donald Kettle, Dean of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Thank you so much for participating as well. Our second panel, which will focus primarily on the vote-a-rama process, includes Bill Hoagland, the former Republican staff director of the Senate Budget Committee, Marty Peone, the former Deputy Democratic Secretary of the Senate, and Eric Ueland, the former Chief of Staff to Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist. Another distinguished panel, and we appreciate very much the willingness of all of you to participate. We're holding this hearing because I believe the current budget process is broken. It has become increasingly difficult to pass budget resolutions in election years, and year after year we face continuing resolutions, omnibus bills, supplementals, and increasingly threats of shutting down the government. At the same time, we have far too little oversight of federal agencies and programs. There's a place where the ranking member and I are in complete agreement. It is that this budget process needs to be reformed and that this committee needs to play a lead role in oversight. And when you're doing a budget every year, you really don't have the time to do the oversight that is desperately needed. Biennial budgeting won't solve all of our problems, but it could help. I now believe the positive attributes of moving to a biennial budget, including more oversight in the non-budget years, certainly outweigh the possible negative considerations. This is how biennial budgeting would work. We put up the slide. In odd numbers years, the President would submit a 2-year budget, and Congress would pass a 2-year budget resolution and enact 2-year appropriations bills. In even-numbered years, Congress would focus on authorizations and oversight. Now, here are some of the arguments for biennial budgeting. One, Congress has effectively moved to biennial budgeting already. In fact, since 1998, budgets have been passed in only 2 election years, 2000, when Senator Domenici was the chairman of this committee, and 2008, when I was chairman. Biennial budgeting, second, biennial budgeting would allow Congress to spend more time on oversight. This would result in more accountability from the executive branch, ensuring that scarce federal resources are being used efficiently and effectively. It would also reduce the use of continuing resolutions and omnibus bills, and it would allow for better long-term planning by federal agencies and programs. Can you imagine running one of these agencies and you're on a continuing resolution for 3 months, for 4 months, for 6 months? This is no way to run an enterprise of any size. There are those who argue against biennial budgeting, and we ought to very directly acknowledge their criticisms. They believe, one, it would reduce the ability to respond to changing economic and geopolitical conditions. Two, it could result in more supplemental funding, especially in the second year. And three, oversight through the appropriations process could be diminished. I used to be in the camp of favoring an annual budget. I did so on the basis that I don't know of any institution of any size that doesn't do an annual budget. But the hard reality is we're not doing annual budgets. We just are not. We've only done 2 in the last 13 years. So, look, let's face up to the reality. In these even-numbered years, election years, let's focus on oversight during that period and have done the budget the year prior for 2 years. Also, I want to ask for unanimous consent at this point to enter into the record a letter from Senator Shaheen and Isaacson, a Democrat and a Republican, to the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction expressing their support for moving to a biennial budget. They've done a lot of work on this. It's good work. I certainly want to commend them publicly for the efforts that they've made. As I mentioned, our second panel will focus primarily on reforming the vote-a-rama process. It's important to remember why we have a vote-a-rama. Under the Congressional Budget Act, the budget resolution and reconciliation bills are given special fast-track treatment that limits debate. 50 hours for a budget resolution, 20 hours for a reconciliation bill, and both measures can be passed with only 51 votes. It's a rare use of majority rule in the Senate. It means these measures cannot be filibustered. As a way to protect the rights of the minority, the Budget Act allows an unlimited number of amendments to be filed even after all time has expired on the resolution or reconciliation bill. So as frustrating as the vote-a-rama may be for senators, the ability to offer unlimited amendments is meant to safeguard minority rights in the absence of the right to filibuster. The problem is what that has developed into in reality. It has really gotten out of control. And frankly, one impediment to getting a budget resolution done is leadership doesn't want to go through vote-a-rama. And they are supported by many of our colleagues who say, that is a spectacle to have vote-a-rama when senators are voting seriatim without time for debate. In fact, typically we, by unanimous consent, agree for 2 minutes on an amendment, 1 minute aside, on serious matters. So I've had senators say to me they weren't certain what they were voting on when they voted in vote-a-rama. That isn't the way the Senate should conduct its business. Vote-a-rama results in back-to-back votes in the Senate, which sometimes drag on for several days. Very long hours. Senators become tired, some cranky. I won't name any names. And even confused because you're voting so quickly with so little consideration. It allows little time to review and debate the many amendments that are offered, and the process has become, in some ways, a spectacle. It results in few substantive changes to the budget, but I think really embarrasses the institution. I mean, this is not the way I think our founding fathers thought the Senate would act, dealing with very consequential measures with, at most, 2 to 5 minutes of discussion, evenly divided. I mean, the fact is, if you didn't get consent, you wouldn't have any time. You just vote. No debate. I think it's clear, it's certainly clear to this senator that the process needs to be reformed. I believe we can improve it while still protecting the rights of senators. And I've been in the minority, I've been in the majority, and I know the tide changes around here, and it will change again in unpredictable ways. I think we've got to write this with the view that either one of us may be in the majority or the minority. So we've got to be very conscious of minority rights. We've also got to be conscious of a system that's functional, not dysfunctional. One concern with the current vote-a-rama process is increasingly being used on issues completely unrelated to the budget. Here are some of the amendments filed during fiscal year 2010 budget resolution debate. Prohibit legislation restricting Second Amendment rights. Prohibit the transfer of detainees at Guantanamo Bay to the United States. Require drug testing of temporary assistance for needy families. Require Amtrak to allow passengers to check firearms in their baggage. Prohibit climate change legislation from regulating methane emissions from biological processes associated with livestock production. Well, whatever the merit of those individual matters, I think we can agree the budget resolution is probably not the place to resolve those matters. The budget resolution should be to resolve budget matters. The number of amendments offered to budget resolutions has generally been rising. In fact, according to the Congressional Research Service, 2007, 2008, 2009 were among the top 5 years with the most amendments offered. And the percentage of votes taken on amendments offered after all time has expired has been rising. This means that senators are increasingly taking votes on amendments that were given very little time for debate. For example, in 2003, we had 50 votes, 80% of which were on amendments that were given no time for debate. You know, that doesn't make much sense. No time for debate. Here are some potential ways we could reform the vote-a-rama process. We could create filing deadlines for first and second degree amendments. This would prevent amendments from being filed after all time has expired and hopefully allow more time for debate. We could increase the number of amendments debated prior to vote-a-rama by reducing the time allotted to each amendment. Again, this would hopefully encourage more substantive debate on amendments. We could limit the number of amendments during vote-a-rama itself. We could establish a brief layover period to review amendments. And we could allow the yielding back of time only by unanimous consent. This would help protect senators' right to continue debate on amendments in light of the other changes we might make that would limit amendments being offered. The vote-a-rama process we have now, I believe, demeans the Senate as an institution. While reform is likely to involve changes to the process, these changes can be carefully constructed and are a necessary trade-off if we want to bring more order to the process and improve the Senate's ability to consider the budget resolution and reconciliation bills in a thoughtful and thorough manner. Whatever we do have to protect minority rights. The fast-track procedures of the Congressional Budget Act are unique and place limitations on debate that are uncommon in the Senate. I've been in the minority, and I appreciate that the right to offer amendments allows the minority to raise substantive issues. But frankly, you know, we've gone beyond that. We really have. We've almost gotten to the point where vote-a-rama has become an abusive exercise for all senators. And interestingly enough, it is really a relative handful on both sides who tend to abuse the process. It's become well known to chairman and ranking member who the senators are that are going to insist on amendments even when amendments virtually identical to theirs have already been considered and voted on. We've had times where we've had almost the identical amendment offered 3 or 4 times. Really. I mean, how many times do we have to vote to establish a record?